over the past few years, we've seen foreign investors' participation being the major driver of whatever goes on in our markets, even not just in our markets, across emerging markets generally. So whatever they do is what the domestic investors will follow. So we are seeing them selling off, and then we are seeing domestic investors too. They press the panic button. Once the foreign investors are leaving, we also leave. When they buy,
when
we
also come
buy.
back,
then we also buy. Yes. So, but we are seeing some. We are still seeing the fact that some investors are still taking up, because as people are selling off, some people are still buying. So we are still seeing domestic investors also taking on as foreign investors are dumping their positions. We are seeing domestic investors taking positions in those stocks too.
All right, you did mention, of course, the banking sector experiencing some kind of sell-off.
Yes.
You know, that was last week, and we know that the banking sector accounts for a significant portion of the market activities. Now, are there fundamental issues to be worried about in this sector?
Okay, really, when we look at the Nigerian market as a whole, the banking sector remains usually the most attractive sector for foreign investors. So when they're coming into the Nigerian market, they're looking at how is GT doing, how is Zenith doing, what's the position of Access Bank, UBA, and okay, then a few others in the industrials like Dangote, and then in the consumer goods space too. Okay, so basically those are the common stocks they look at. So coming down to the banking sector, the major fears that we've seen for the banking sector in Nigeria for the past few years now is on the part of non-performing loans, which has become problematic and has made the central bank to take a strong and a strict stance on that in terms of managing non-performing loans and curbing the rise in the banking sector. So, and also on the part of the capital adequacy ratio of a couple of banks in the Nigerian banking sector is also a source of worry for investors when looking at the banking sector. But we see more of positives for the banking sector than negatives. Talking about the non-performing loans, for example, the reason why we had high non-performing loans for Nigerian banks was because they were largely exposed to the oil and gas and the power sector. Now we are seeing oil prices improve, and then we are seeing oil and gas firms doing well now, coming back to positive performances, and then they're able to service their debts and their loans. And when you look at the power sector too, there seem to be improvements also in the power sector. So when you're looking at these two factors together, we are seeing that non-performing loans for these banks, we are not expecting a serious spike. For example, we saw that most of them already booked impairments for their non-performing loans in 2017. They booked a large amount of impairments in 2017, and we've even seen banks like Stanbic begin to do some write-backs on their impairment charges, which means that we are seeing some of them recoup some of those loans that believe that were bad. And then now, when we also look at the issue of the capital adequacy ratio, particularly is not tied to the tier 1 banks. It's tied more to the smaller banks like Sky Bank, Unity Bank, and then maybe Diamond Bank still operating around that threshold of the central bank. So it's really not the problem of the problems or the downside risks to the banking sector really does not affect the tier 1 banks, which investors love to look at. So we are not seeing so much risk on that part. Now, when we also look at valuations, in terms of price to book, Nigerian banks are significantly undervalued. At price to book, we're at around 0.89 times price to book. When we compare these to African peers, we take the Egyptian markets, for example, is above 2 times. We take the Kenyan markets, they're about 1.6 times price to book. They are the banking sector. When we compare these to the 0.89 times of the Nigerian banking sector, we see that there's a lot of upside opportunities for the banking stocks. We look at return on equity too for the tier 1 banks that investors look at. GT's return on equity is above 30%. Zenith Bank is coming close to the 30% level. Stanbic too is coming close to the 30% level. And this is basically like the average return on equity in also banks in South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt. So we see no reason why the price to book for Nigerian banks should be that low. So that presents an opportunity for upside for Nigerian banks. So it's more of positives than negatives.
Okay, you did mention that while the foreign investors are pulling out,
yes,
taking out, some domestic investors are picking up those stocks that were dumped. Now, what are these investors seeing differently there?
Okay, when we look back to the bearish markets that we had in 2015 and 2016, so many investors stayed away from the markets, particularly domestic investors, they stayed away from the markets, and we saw market rebound in 2017. So many of them missed the opportunity to buy the dip of the markets in 2015 and 2016 because, okay, they were not so sure about how soon the market will recover from that bearish run. So we are seeing them not wanting, number one, we're not seeing them not wanting to miss out of the opportunity of prices going down because valuation levels are very attractive. We look at price earnings of the all-share index is at 11.1 times, as I said earlier. Comparing to other African peers, we are relatively undervalued. So these domestic investors are seeing this opportunity now to buy the dip of the market in anticipation of an upturn in market performance, particularly looking at and the ending of the 2019 elections.
Okay, the month is wrapping up and we're going into a new month. So what's your outlook for the equities market in June?
Okay, for the equities market, in the long term, we are still positive and bullish on the market, but we expect that for the month of June, we might still see some sell-offs in the early parts of the month, but we still anticipate that there will be rebound in market performance towards the end of the month as investors...
Towards the end of this month?
Towards the end of June, you know, we're talking about the outlook for June, right?
Yes,
so
okay.
yes, we might still see the sell-offs continue, you know, this week towards the end of this month down to the early parts of June, but we most likely will still see a rebound because when we look at the relative strength index of the all-share index, is at a low base below the 40, going down to the oversold region. So we see opportunities for the markets to rebound in June.
All right, thank you very much for your time. Ayorinde Akinloye, investment analyst with AfriInvest Securities. We'll take another break, and when we come back, we'll look at how the market is taking shape in a new week. To stay with us.